It's October 2030. 22 American law schools are shutting down. They're not renovating, they're not merging, they're just shutting down, finishing out their remaining students and closing for good. And another 30 to 40 law schools are in serious financial trouble. 4 years. That's all it took to go from record breaking application numbers and the legal profession is back to a crisis that threatens a third of American law schools. My name is Steve Schwartz. I run LSAT Unplugged. And what I'm about to walk you through is a scenario. It's not a prediction. Think of it like a stress test written as a memo from the future. Every force I describe is already in motion right now, in 2026. What I'm going to do is play this forward to show you what happens when all of these forces hit at the same time. We're going to stay in October 2030 for most of this, and then I'll tell you when we come back to the present. The breaking moment wasn't a protest or a lawsuit or a viral thread. It was a spreadsheet. In October 2030, a bunch of law schools that depend almost entirely on tuition to survive sent updated financial projections to their universities. And the numbers showed something they couldn't hide anymore. They were about to run out of money. Not in some abstract long-term way, but in the next 6 months. You see, many of these schools had taken out big loans, often to build new buildings during the boom years. And those loans came with rules. One of the biggest rules is that your tuition revenue has to stay above a certain level or you're in default. Think of it like a minimum balance on a credit card, except the penalty isn't a fee or interest, it's your entire institution. When enrollment dropped, and the schools were giving out bigger and bigger scholarships just to fill seats, the tuition money coming in fell below that minimum. And once you cross that line, it's a crisis. The schools had been managing enrollment for years, but this time, enrollment started managing them. The system didn't break because students stopped wanting to become lawyers. It broke because law school became impossible to pay for at a huge number of schools, and those schools had no backup plan. There's one cycle that explains everything, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. It goes like this. Money gets tighter, so schools give out bigger scholarships to attract students. This means less revenue per student. Less revenue means budget cuts. Budget cuts weaken the school. Fewer programs, fewer professors, worse bar prep. Weaker schools produce worse outcomes. Worse outcomes scare away applicants. And fewer applicants means even bigger scholarships are needed to fill seats, and the money gets even tighter. That cycle existed before, but there used to be something that kept it in check, and that thing broke. To understand how bad it got, you have to understand how good it looked. The 2025 and 2026 admission cycles were historic. Applications surged 18% in 2025, and another 15% on top of that for the 2026 entering class. The August 2025 LSAT drew 26,000 test takers, up 18% year over year, and first-year class sizes hit the highest numbers since 2013. Schools that had been struggling for a decade suddenly had breathing room. Classes were full, scholarship budgets grew, and some schools started building new facilities for the first time in years. The story made sense. Politics was chaotic, so people wanted to fight for justice. AI was disrupting other careers, so a law degree felt safe. And students wanted a credential that felt solid and durable. But anybody who was paying attention in 2010 should have recognized the pattern. The last big surge was fueled by the 2008 financial crisis. Applications peaked at over 87,000, schools expanded, but by 2013, applications collapsed to 54,000. Schools that grew during that boom spent the next decade in brutal contraction, and some never recovered. But this time, the boom was louder, and the bust was worse, because this time, the normal ups and downs of the cycle crashed into structural problems that didn't exist in 2013. Let me walk you through each one. Before the crash, legal education ran on a quiet truth. The system was messy, but the money was always there. And the money came from one place, a federal loan program called Grad PLUS. And here is how Grad PLUS worked. If you got into any accredited law school, The federal government would loan you the full cost of attendance. All of it, tuition, living expenses, books, everything. Nobody checked whether the school's graduates were actually getting jobs. Nobody asked whether the degree was worth the price. You got in, you got the loan, period. That's how schools could charge $85,000 per year, because students could borrow $85,000 per year. Grad PLUS was the hidden subsidy that made the entire bottom half of legal education possible. Now, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act killed that system. Starting in July 2026, law students could only borrow $50,000 a year from the federal government with a $200,000 lifetime cap. And $200,000 might sound like plenty, but a private law school with tuition, fees, and living expenses can easily cost $270,000 over 3 years. That leaves a $70,000 gap that federal loans won't cover. So who fills the gap? Private lenders, banks, and here's the thing about banks. They actually look at whether you could pay them back. If you're going to a law school whose graduates land $250,000 a year big law jobs, banks are going to fight to give you a loan. But if you're going to a school whose graduates are making only $55,000 a year in public interest work or struggling to find legal jobs at all, banks want nothing to do with you. Now, let me make this concrete. Imagine a student, we'll call her Maya. She got into a regional private law school in the Southeast for fall 2027. First-gen college graduate, poli-sci major, 3.4 GPA, 156 LSAT, exactly the kind of student this school had been admitting for decades. She got a half tuition scholarship. That left about $120,000 in total costs. Under the old system, Grad PLUS would have covered every penny. But under the new caps, federal loans covered only $100,000. She needed $20,000 more. 3 out of 4 private lenders rejected her. The school's job placement numbers just weren't good enough. The fourth offered her a variable rate loan at 12.8%. So Maya chose to go to a different school, one that was lower ranked, but offered her a full ride. That school left her in with numbers it would have waitlisted 3 years earlier. The school that lost Maya her tuition money. The school that gained Maya lowered its entering class stats. Now, multiply that by thousands of students at dozens of schools. The money got tighter, scholarships got bigger. Now, Grad PLUS disappearing was the most obvious problem, but there was a quieter one that hit just as hard. For years, if you wanted to go into public interest law, working as a public defender at a legal aid clinic for the government, the deal was simple. You borrowed a lot, you enrolled in an income-based repayment plan that kept your monthly payments low, and after 10 years of public service, the rest of your debt was forgiven. That's public service loan forgiveness. It made public interest careers financially survivable, even with huge debt. But the One Big Beautiful Bill rewrote the payment system for anyone borrowing after July 2026. The old plans were phased out. A new plan replaced them with different rules and higher monthly payments. Public service loan forgiveness wasn't killed, but the whole system feeding into it changed. If you were thinking about becoming a public defender in 2027, the math looked completely different than it had 2 years earlier. You borrow less because Grad PLUS was gone. You pay more each month because the new repayment plan was less generous. You're navigating a totally different forgiveness timeline. For some people, the numbers still worked, but for a lot of people, they didn't. So the public interest pipeline dried up. Fewer people applying to legal aid, more people leaving after their fellowship commitment. And that created a huge problem for law schools. Why? Because at schools ranked 30th through 100th, public interest in government jobs typically absorbed 25 to 30% of every graduating class. Those jobs made the school's employment numbers look respectable. But when that pipeline dried up, graduates started ending up in jobs that didn't require a law degree at all, and the employment data got worse. That safety net wasn't just helping students, it was quietly propping up entire schools, and now it was gone. So scholarships kept climbing while revenue kept falling. Now, most people think The LSAT optional debate is about fairness or access or part of the culture war, but it's actually about money. The LSAT wasn't just used to decide who gets in, it was the system's main tool for deciding who pays what. Here's how it works. Law schools charge different students different prices. They call it tuition discounting. If you score a 170 on the LSAT, you get a full ride because your score pulls the school's medians up, which helps their rankings. If you score a 160, you get some money. If you score a 170, you pay almost nothing. If you score a 140, you pay full price. The LSAT gives every school a common yardstick for pricing. When the American Bar Association started letting schools go LSAT optional, that yardstick broke. It happened gradually, first with the GRE as an alternative, then the JD next. Then, in late 2024, the American Bar Association voted to let schools admit up to 100% of their class with no test at all. By 2026, 14 schools had permission to do this, and more followed every year. Now, when test optional spread, two things happened. Applications went up, which was great for marketing. But scholarship pricing got messy as a result, which was terrible for their budgets. Without a common test score, schools couldn't figure out what students were worth. So they did the only thing they could. They just threw more money at everybody. Bigger scholarships just to lock students down. More bidding wars. More students playing schools against each other for better scholarship offers. More guessing, more waste. And so the law school tuition sticker price became meaningless and everybody knew it. And the consequences showed up later. Students who got in without any test score sat for the bar 3 years down the road, and bar passage rates at test optional schools started slipping. It wasn't a total collapse at first, but it was a clear downward trend, and it was only speeding up. So law school revenue fell, and schools had to start cutting. Now, here's a fact that has nothing to do with politics or policy. During the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, people had fewer babies, a lot fewer, and as those babies are now college age, and there weren't as many of them. And so the college age population started shrinking in 2025. You've probably already seen the headlines, small colleges closing left and right. That is the demographic cliff hitting undergraduate schools first. Law school deans told themselves it wasn't their problem. They said, "We recruit nationally, so the cliff won't hit us the same way." But it did hit them just with a 4-year delay. And it hit harder because they had grown during the boom. By 2028, the pool of college graduates feeding into law school had shrunk by about 15%. The top 20 law schools barely noticed because they always have more applicants than they need. But schools ranked 50th and below were fighting over a much smaller pie. And here is the painful part. The future applicant pool was more diverse. More first-gen students, more lower-income students, people who needed more financial support. They were showing up at the exact moment the financial support system was being gutted. Now, this is the part that explains why schools didn't just tighten their belts and ride it out. And this is what explains the closures. Most law schools are not like small businesses that can adjust when time gets tough. They're run like big, slow institutions with massive fixed costs. They've got buildings to maintain, tenured faculty to pay, programs they've got to staff, and many of them had borrowed money to grow. And when a university borrows money, they're usually doing so by issuing what's called a revenue bond that comes with rules. The most important rule is you have to bring in a certain amount of tuition revenue every year, or you are in violation of your loan agreement. Think of it like this. The bank says, we're going to lend you $50 million for this new building, but your tuition income has to stay above X amount every year, or we have a problem. When tuition revenue drops, it's not just less money to spend. It's potentially breaking the terms of your loan. And when that happens, the consequences are immediate. So let me do the math. This is a simplified version, but it's based on real numbers from schools that failed. Imagine a school that enrolls 200 first-year students. The sticker price is $50,000 per year. But most students get scholarships, so on average, the school only collects about $30,000 per student. That is $6 million from the first year class. But now the cliff hits. The school loses 30 students down to 170. And because there are fewer good applicants to go around, the school has to offer even bigger scholarships to fill those 170 seats. Average tuition collected per student drops to about $26,400. So revenue from the first year class is only $4.5 million. That is a $1.5 million drop, 25%, from losing just 15% of the class. Multiply that across all 3 years of students, and you've got a $3 to $4 million hole in a school that only had a $25 to $30 million budget to begin with. If that school borrowed money for a new building during the boom, it cannot make its loan payments. The schools that built during 2025 and 2026 borrowed against enrollment projections that assumed the good times were permanent. And when those projections missed, there was no cushion. And here's where it gets really ugly. Once a school is scrambling to meet its loan requirements, everything gets sacrificed. Hiring freezes. Fewer course sections. Clinical programs get cut as well. Which is ironic because those were exactly the programs the new bar exam tested. Meanwhile, marketing spending goes up because the only way to avoid defaulting on the loan is to fill more seats. And the only way to fill more seats in a shrinking market is to let in weaker students with bigger scholarships, which means bar passage rates drop, which means outcomes get worse, which means fewer people want to come, and so the cycle spins faster. I spoke with a second-year student at one of the schools that shut down. He'd moved his family across the country for a full tuition scholarship. Quote, "They recruited me," he said. "They told me the school was on solid footing, that applications were up, that the new building was a sign of commitment to the future. The new building is what killed them. They couldn't make the payments when enrollment dropped. And so he transferred to a higher-ranked school, but lost his scholarship. He was carrying $80,000 in debt he'd never planned for, in a city where he knew nobody, and he'd graduate a semester late. But he was one of the lucky ones because at least he found a seat." Now, on top of everything else, the bar exam changed. The new version, called the Next Gen Bar Exam, launched in July 2026 in 10 states. More states adopted it in 2027 and 2028, including New York, Florida, and Texas. California and Nevada said no thanks and built their own exams. Now, honestly, the new test was probably better because the old bar exam tested whether you could memorize 14 different subjects. The new one tested only 8 subjects plus actual lawyering skills like research, client counseling, and negotiation. More practical, more realistic. But for schools that were already broke and bleeding students, it was one more thing to spend money on and one more thing that could go wrong. And different states were on different timelines. Some were running the old and new exams at the exact same time. California was doing its own thing, and it was chaos for schools whose students take the bar in different states. Programs got weaker, and fewer people wanted to come. Meanwhile, the system that kept law schools accountable started falling apart. For decades, the American Bar Association was the only organization that could accredit law schools. If your school had ABA accreditation, your degree was good everywhere. If it didn't, your options were extremely limited. In January 2026, Texas said, "We're done relying on the ABA." Florida followed 9 days later. Ohio and Tennessee started similar moves. In the short term, not much changed. Every existing law school kept its accreditation. Graduates could still practice anywhere. But the long-term signal was huge. The national system was cracking. Once Texas and Florida opened the door, new players showed up. Online law schools, 2-year programs, corporate-backed academies charging $15,000 a year instead of $55,000. Some were serious and innovative. Others were basically the law school version of those sketchy for-profit colleges you've heard about. And here's the thing that should matter to you. An ABA degree used to let you practice in any state. A degree from a Texas-only school lets you practice in Texas. So if this keeps going, law degrees become like driver's licenses. They're valid where they were issued, but they're a hassle everywhere else. The top law schools got more valuable because their brand replaced the national standard that was falling apart around them. Schools in the middle lost their biggest selling point, which was portability. And the cheap local options started taking market share. So the law degree didn't die, but it split into tiers. Now, while all this was happening, something quieter was chipping away at the basic economic deal of being a lawyer. You need a law degree to do legal work, but that was becoming less and less true over time. Arizona let non-lawyers own law firms back in 2020. By 2025, over 100 alternative legal businesses were running this in the state. Utah let non-lawyers and even software provide legal services. Other states started exploring the same idea. And by 2028, AI tools had gotten so good that the line between legal information and legal advice was basically gone. Some states had formally legalized these tools. Others just couldn't stop people from using them. Every task a non-lawyer could do was a task that no longer justified 3 years of law school and $200,000 in debt. Now, AI didn't need to replace experienced lawyers to hurt law schools. It just needed to replace the work that new lawyers do in their first few years, the work that trains them and justifies hiring a lot of them. By 2028, law firms had figured out a new model: hire fewer junior associates, give them AI tools, get the same work done with a fraction of the people. A litigation partner at a major firm put it this way, quote, 3 years ago, a doc review project would have required 6 associates working 2 weeks. Now it's 2 associates and an AI tool for 3 days. Same quality, clients happier. The associates we do hire are better. They have to be. We need fewer of them so we can be pickier. Of course, AI didn't wipe out legal jobs altogether. It wiped out the jobs in the middle, the ones that absorbed the middle and bottom of every graduating class. Top students from elite schools are always fine. Recruiters fought over them. But if you graduated in the middle of your class from a school ranked 75th, the $75,000 a year associate job at a regional firm that used to be waiting for you was now gone, replaced by 1 associate using AI doing the work of 3. And here is the irony that makes this so painful. Students rushed into law school in 2025 and 2026 partly because AI was disrupting other careers, so law felt safe. They graduated in 2028 and 2029 into a legal market where AI had eliminated the exact entry-level jobs they went to law school to get. And of course, this has happened before. The 2008 recession drove people into law school. They graduated in 2011 into the worst legal job market in a generation. The 2025 anxiety drove people into law school. They graduated into something worse. Not just a bad year, but a permanent change in how law firms hire. The first closures came in 2029. 2 small, private, unranked schools announced they were shutting down. And people shrugged. They said, those schools were always struggling, it's not a trend. But by 2030, it was clearly a trend. Students at closing schools scrambled to transfer. Some lost their scholarships. Some lost credits that didn't transfer. And some just dropped out. Prospective students saw the closures and said law school wasn't worth the risk, which shrank the applicant pool further, which put more schools in danger. 22 law schools closing, 30 to 40 more in trouble. And the worst of the demographic cliff hadn't even arrived yet. Of course, the damage wasn't spread evenly. It split into 3 groups. Group 1 was the elite schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and the rest of the top 14. They shrank their class sizes, kept their outcomes strong, and used their brand as a shield. The crisis was invisible to them. Group 2 was the strong state schools, with lower tuition, local reputation, graduates who go straight into state government and local firms. Public schools in big states with in-state pricing and strong alumni networks actually benefited because when the national system fractured, local value went up. But Group 3 was the schools caught in the middle. Private schools that are tuition dependent with mediocre outcomes and no endowment to fall back on. They were carrying debt from building projects, exposed to every single pressure at the same time. That's where the closures happened. Fewer, stronger schools might be healthier in the long run, but that's pretty cold comfort if you're the student at a school that just got shut down, or the professor who got laid off, or the community that just lost an institution that it depended upon. Now, one strange thing happened. When LSAT optional went mainstream, you would think the role of testing would just disappear, but instead the market rebuilt it with more interviews for admissions, more writing samples, more school-specific tests, more structured scholarship levels tied to other metrics, because it turns out that systems cannot function without ways to measure people. When you take away one measurement, they invent new ones. Not because tests are perfect, but because guessing is expensive. The schools in the middle that survived, they were the ones that found rigorous ways to evaluate applicants, with or without the LSAT. The schools that used test optional as an excuse to stop evaluating people altogether, those were the ones that closed. Of course, this is October 2030, but you're not watching this in October 2030, you're watching this in March 2026. Right now, applications are near all-time highs. The demographic cliff has not hit law schools yet. Grad PLUS just ended this year. Only 14 law schools have gone test optional. The new bar exam is launching this summer. Texas and Florida just made their moves on accreditation. The repayment system just got rewritten, and AI is impressive, sure, but it has not yet transformed legal hiring. Everything is calm, everything's okay right now. Every single force I just described is already in motion, none has fully arrived. I'm not saying all of this will happen exactly as I described it. I am saying the pressures are real, they're building, and the schools most at risk are the ones doing the least to prepare. So let's talk straight up now. If you're thinking about law school right now, do the math, and I mean the real math, not the brochure math. Calculate your total cost of attendance, including tuition, living expenses, everything, under the new borrowing caps. Don't assume you can borrow whatever you need. Those days are over. Second, look up the school's actual employment outcomes, not the marketing stats, but I mean the real data. It's called 509 data in the American Bar Association reports. It's public, and it tells you exactly what percentage of graduates got what kinds of jobs at what salaries, and it's all on the ABA website. Just Google X Law School 509 and you'll find it on the American Bar Association website. Also, figure out what bar exam you're going to be taking. It might be completely different from what current students took. And ask the school this question: what is your plan if enrollment drops 20%? If they don't have a clear answer, that tells you everything you need to know. Do not attend a school that might not exist when you graduate. Now, if you're weighing a school outside the top 50, a full ride scholarship is only worth it if the school is still open and its graduates are still passing the bar when you finish. A free degree from a school that shuts down is totally worthless. A discounted degree from a school whose bar passage rate drops below the minimum during your third year is a disaster. So look at financial stability, not just the sticker price. Now, if you're thinking about public interest law, public service loan forgiveness still exists, but the system around it has changed. Run the numbers under the new repayment plan, not the old one, and be honest about whether it works. Public interest law is definitely a calling worth pursuing, but you want to pursue with clear eyes and real numbers. Now, if you are a law school administrator watching this, stress test your school against a 20% enrollment drop for 3 years straight. If you expand during the boom, ask yourself whether those commitments survive if the boom was just a cycle. You want to build a financial cushion instead of a new building. Now, of course, a system can handle one problem. It can usually handle two, but it's going to break when a dozen problems hit at the same time. If you've got fewer students, less borrowing, no reliable way to price scholarships, a gutted safety net, new licensing paths that don't require a JD, a brand new bar exam, AI shrinking entry-level hiring, states walking away from national accreditation, and schools financed like they'll go forever, when they won't, you've got a problem. No single one of these is the villain, but the danger is that they arrive together in a perfect storm. If the crisis happens, it's not because law degrees stopped being valuable. The JD is still one of the most flexible credentials you can earn. The world definitely needs lawyers. The world is more complex, more regulated, more disrupted. We need more lawyers, not fewer. But the crisis here is about the business of law schools. Too many schools, depending on too few sources of money, in a market that's changing faster than institutions built on 3-year cycles can keep up with.